I drink so much water and so much tea that I often wonder if I drink if I'm the one guy, because you know how everyone's dehydrated. I often wonder if I'm like the one guy who's not, who's like the
Not
opposite.
dehydrated.
Mhm.
Yeah, like 80% of the world is chronically dehydrated except for
Yeah.
you, who's overhydrated.
And I'm overhydrated, and I'm like urinating 40 times a day, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you have spinal problems because you have no vitamins in your body."
Yeah, you've pissed out all your electrolytes.
Literally, yeah, all day long. And there was a point at which I was like, "Oh man, I go to the doctor. I'm like, I don't know if it's normal, And he's like, "Well, how many times do you go to the bathroom every day?" And I was like, like 19 or 20, probably. And he's like, "Wait, what? Per day?" I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much."
How soon did he put his finger in your butthole after you told him that you had to go to
Yeah.
the bathroom 19 times?
It was
It's like, okay, Jordan, bend over.
Yeah. It was he was like, "Well, wait a minute, you're too young for this," because this is years ago. But he's like, "How much liquid are you drinking?" I'm like, "All right, I got to tally this up," and it was somewhere around like 4 liters of tea, like decaffeinated, just herbal tea or water, tons of spring water, sparkling water, maybe like a kombucha or like a decaf or regular coffee in the morning, just like so much liquid because I'm broadcasting all day, talking and
Yeah.
getting rid of all that stuff, and just like trying to keep my mouth moist too, because
Right.
otherwise it's really uncomfortable, and it's just consistent every single day.
Yeah.
So for a while I was like, maybe you can drink too much, but if you Google, "Am I drinking too much?" you end up with either alcohol stuff or you end up with like, "Oh, it's almost impossible to drink too much liquid. You'd have to drink liters and liters, gallons of liquid." And I'm like, what if you're doing that though?
I think it's just about electrolyte balance. So the only issues that I really see are, you can run into electrolyte balance issues if you're not replenishing, those
Sugar
those
and
minerals.
salt, or just salt.
Yeah, salt. You don't need the sugar. Plenty of that.
Yeah,
plenty of that in your diet in general. But making sure you get enough salt, maybe some additional minerals like some magnesium, potassium, different things like that, along with the sodium. But so speaking of broadcasting all day, I saw you have a little badge on the Art of Charm now. It says celebrating 10 years.
Oh yeah, 10 years.
10 years. Not a lot of people can say that.
No, 10 years of doing the show, and that was in December. So I don't know when you're listening to this, but that was December.
Might be 11 years.
Yeah, it might be 11
Close
years
to
now.
it.
And then I got to
Yeah.
figure out how to update the show art again. But 10's a nice round number. Might leave it there for a while. So yeah, it's been a long time. But, of course, it wasn't every day, all day for 10 years. It was once every 3 weeks for the first couple years.
Yeah.
And then podcasting became more popular. And then it was like, oh, I really enjoy doing this. And I didn't start off thinking like, this is a business that I'm going to start doing. So it's an interesting path because it is easy for somebody like me right now to look at On It as a brand and go, "Oh man, you guys, you started in 2011 and I started in 2006. Oh, I'm such a failure." But it's like, well, I kind of didn't really treat it like a real business until maybe just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. What was the turning point? Was it just a matter of like momentum, where you just saw, oh, damn, or was it a particular advertising offer where you're like, well, wait a minute here.
There were a couple of, maybe you'd call it pivotal moments, but that might be putting too dramatic of a spin on it. It's hard to say. But one of them it was episode 250. This is like our 7-year anniversary episode or something like that. And I had made friends with this producer guy, and he was like, "Hey, the equipment you're using sounds like crap. Let me lend you a bunch of stuff." And he lent me a bunch of stuff, and I spent a whole week figuring out how to use it. It was really complicated professional audio gear.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, this is a hobby thing, and I really started to enjoy it. And the interview that I had at the end of that week was Robert Greene, author of Mastery, 48 Laws of Power, etc. And he was like, "I've been waiting to do this interview for so long. How come you didn't ask me to do this earlier?" And I thought, well, because you're a world famous author and I run a freaking podcast in my girlfriend's living room, or somebody else's basement, depending on, how long we're talking about. And at the end of the interview, he goes, "This is one of the best interviews that I've ever done, I think." And I thought, like, what are you talking about? Are you just a really nice guy to everybody? I mean, what a compliment. And I realized, look, I'd done a lot of prep work. Like I said, it was episode 250. And I remember after that thinking, well, if he thinks that, then maybe I'm really starting to get the hang of this after 7 years. And that's when I really doubled down on learning all the stuff about the audio gear, really upgrading the sound quality in the show. And I think I went from dabbler to professional. And I think it took 7 years because I'd never really thought about the possibility of becoming really pro in that particular niche.
And sometimes it just takes time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a point that, I know Gary Vee makes a lot of times. Like, things are slower than you want it to be. We have this instant gratification fantasy. Like, you're going to do a podcast and all of a sudden out of the gate, you're going to get that 10,000 downloads for their first show and just crush it, and build from there. No, you're going to get 200 downloads, you're going to get 300, 350.
Yeah. And 200 of them are like robots or some guy whose app got stuck, downloading it 58 times.
Yeah. So, and you got to fight through that. You got to, like, if you really believe this, if you know where you're going, you got to just keep going. Did you ever doubt it? I guess when you're not taking it that seriously and you just enjoy it, it's easier not to just get frustrated and say, screw this.
Yeah. That's an interesting point and a good question, because there was a lot of people go, well, what do you regret? And I think I asked you this on my show.
Yeah.
On Art of Charm podcast. What do you regret about, or what would you redo if you had to start over? And there's one side of me that says, well, I would have treated the show more like something professional. We'd been doing training and live training boot camps and online products and things like that for a long time, but I treated the show, I had 1 foot in hobby and 1 foot in, this is a lead gen for our business, or this is something that I'm doing professionally. I want to say that I would do the show more professionally and treat it more like a business earlier on. But the problem is, when you try to do that early on, you look at things like downloads, like you mentioned earlier, and you go, oh man, I'm only getting 1,000 people listening. This is a waste of time. There's never going to be ROI, and you give up. Mm-hmm. And that's why most people quit. I think the stats are like 98% of shows, they quit before episode 13.
Wow.
And that's most podcasts. And that's probably, at some level, there's going to be some skew like that, maybe less extreme, for pretty much every artistic pursuit, every business pursuit.
Yep.
So I want to say, I treat it more like a professional endeavor, but the luxury that we had of not caring, of releasing once every other week, doing the show when we were interested in doing the show, only when we had a guest that we were interested in, that was really nice. Not looking at the numbers really beyond once a quarter to make sure nothing was broken or that we were going straight down or straight up. Looking at those numbers just occasionally and not worrying about it, not living every minute of the day by that was a huge advantage, because it just kept me doing something that I enjoyed, slowly getting better at it, but not worrying about, oh, well, the last episode got 8,000 downloads and this one got 6. Obviously, I'm not good at this. I quit. Right. Yeah. And I do that to myself now. And when I look at, oh man, this last month we got 4 million downloads. Oh no, this month we only got 3.8. This is a downward trend. And I'm like, wait, hold on, reality check. 7 years you did this and it probably went up and down like crazy.
Sure.
And you never gave a crap. Now we have a down day and you think, my life is over, like reality check.
Yeah.
So you have to really bring that mindset into any business that you start. You have to, I don't normally advise people to dabble, but I think in this respect, I'm going to say, look, there's something to be said for not being obsessed about tracking every little thing, because you can really talk your way out of doing something that you like by turning it into a business and just ruining it completely.
Yeah. It's interesting, especially on the podcast thing, because like if you had a room, and I've done this, I've had a room full of 150 people, and I'll give them a 1 hour talk, and I'll feel like, man, really good. And it's just 150 people who heard it. But I had the podcast going for a while, and I was getting, 20,000, 25,000 people listening, and be like, 20,000.
Nah, this sucks.
This sucks, right? And then, one of the people on my team was like, 20,000. You realize, like, you used to go to LA Kings games. You realize they had 16,000 people in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like 20,000 is a stadium that you're talking to, and you're in their ear and they're paying attention. Like get it right. And the same thing with like a couple hundred downloads. Like, all right, maybe not all of those downloads. We'll find out soon when they release the actual statistics, what's actually happening. But there's a lot of people listening. And if you actually had those and could see those people, then you would realize that even with a small podcast, you're making an impact.
The level of influence is something that you can't really, you have to imagine it, right? And I remember when we first hit, I don't know, I think it was like 105,000 downloads per episode a while back. I remember thinking like, oh man, we're growing so slowly. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I went to the University of Michigan. You go to a football game there and like place is sold out. People are just, you can't, I mean, it's 45-minute bathroom line.
The big house.
Right, the big house. And they go, you're watching a football game with 105,704 people. And you're like looking around at this immense sea of people in the big house. And then you think, wait a minute, every time I turn this thing on and I, say something that I haven't thought very clearly about, maybe I should pay more attention because there's this many people are listening. Yeah. Now it's way more than that. So it's hard whenever I think, oh man, you compare yourself to Rogan or something like that, which is not a good comparison measure for any right. podcaster to have. You think, I'm never going to get that kind of audience. And that may well be true, but the question is, does it matter? Because if you had the chance to stand at the bottom of Michigan Stadium and go, hey, everybody, I just wanted to tell you about Blue Apron or on it,
you would shit your pants every time.
Of course, every time. And the amount of influence you have that those people willingly grabbed your show and are listening to it and they're listening to your voice, not only is it a huge level of responsibility and influence, but it's a huge honor. So if you have 105 people instead of 105,000, and you're worried about the quality of your influence or your show or your platform or your blog or whatever you've got going, just imagine them all sitting in front of you and the dynamic changes tremendously.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. But the podcast space, though, now it's getting interesting because it is crowded.
350,000 or something like that podcast now.
And so it can be really discouraging to start a podcast at this point because like, how do you have time to listen to all that? So are you still, recommending the average everyday person, if they have the point to get across, are you still saying, you know what? Yeah, it's crowded, but your message is unique. Go do it. Do you still think, are you still in that camp?
I don't think I was ever in that camp of recommending podcasting because I think it's a terrible business. And it's kind of, and I don't know how you feel about, let's say, fitness and supplements. If other people, I'm sure you get emails like, hey, I've got a great idea. I don't want to launch it with you, though. I want to go off on my own. You're probably like, hey, look, whatever. Or good luck, or don't do it. I'm in the don't do it camp when it comes to starting your own show. I think everybody wants to have their own podcast because they feel like it's fun and cool, and that's great. But a lot more people think they're going to make a business out of it. They're going to become some sort of thought leader, which I hate that term also. The term thought leader is, to me, kind of just bullshitty completely. And it says, I want to have influence over people so that I can brand myself as this expert in this area. And the whole thing just kind of smacks of ego. And if you're listening to me right now and you're like, I don't care what you say, Jordan, I'm going to start it. And I don't care if anybody listens to it. Then you're doing it for the right reasons.
You're the right person.
You're the right person. Because if I say don't do it, it's a terrible business, which it is. It's hard to earn money. It's hard to produce the show. It's really hard because you got to be a performer. And if you get sick of doing your show, you can't be like, hey, Clarius, can you hire someone to do my podcast for me? Because I'm just bored of this thing. No, It's Aubrey Marcus podcast, right?
Yep.
You can't outsource it. That's bad for business. If you can't outsource it, that's a problem for every single business out there. So you better love doing it. You better like doing it regularly, and you have to take pride in it because now the competition isn't just what it was when I started, which was, hey, we're in a basement and we might release one every other week or so. Not sure what day. People were like, good enough for me, Jordan. Now it's got to be every day that you say you're going to release, you got to release, right? If you're going to do it every Thursday, it's got to be every Thursday. People are expecting it. They don't want to hear your furnace in the background. They don't want to hear people talking in the background. They don't want one person's voice to be louder than the other. They don't want it to be in stereo because it makes you dizzy.
Don't you dare eat a snack.
And don't you eat a snack. No matter what it is, you better not eat a protein bar, wrapping that thing. You can't do that. The bar is much higher. Why not become a blogger where you can have 58 people that make $25 an hour writing these posts, and then you rewrite them in your own voice. Now you've got enough for a month. And you can let it go, right? You have to love doing it. It's just like, it's a passion project where guys like you and me and Rogan can just by the grace of God and a ton of hard work make a good living out of it. But it is a terrible, it's like saying, look, I'm going to move to Austin and I'm going to be a guitar player and I'm definitely going to make a living off of this.
Yeah,
and it's going to be a great way to make money.
For sure.
If I told you that, you'd be like, you're a moron.
Yeah.
But if I tell you I'm going to do a podcast and release an ebook, people are like, oh, bravo, that is genius. And I'm just thinking, what are you doing? What are you talking about? But on the other hand, right, when I started, there were 800 shows in iTunes, and me and AJ, we weren't starting it looking for a business idea. We just thought, no one's going to listen to this. How are they going to find us? There's 800 other shows. Now there's 350,000. Are there too many now? There's a lot. I don't know if there's still too many. I think we're still well before peak podcast, but it is trendy now.
It is. And it's an interesting thing now because iTunes has so dominated the search engine aspect of it, right? Like, and hacking the iTunes, I think is a real kind of factor at this point, like trying to show up on the lists and gaming the lists. And it's a weird environment. It's also something you see in social media where there was a period where people got ahead, like buying 50,000 followers or 100,000 followers.
We're on to you now, though, man.
Yeah, because then you usually see the engagement, but then you can buy followers that have engagement. Right. But then it looks funny and they're saying the same things.
Everything you post is like, cool, man, great one.
But that worked. That worked for a while. That tricked a bunch of people back in the day. I remember we had people coming to us and they had, 1 million Twitter followers. And I'm like, how the hell do you have 1 million Twitter followers? Like what possible? And then we would look into it and just things seemed a little fishy, but he almost got a big, sponsorship contract and he was getting other things from that. And it's interesting, when this kind of, and I was talking to Duncan Trussell about this, like when the artificial intelligence bot system and you can really becomes a force where it becomes very hard to distinguish
good point.
the bots from that. And you have download farms that are hacking the iTunes charts and writing comments, and so you put out a podcast and it gets 500 comments and they all look legit and it's 500,000 downloads from all over the world and you look like a celebrity and you're on What's Hot and then you're on top of the charts and then actual people are downloading it and then it's like there's an interesting game that's going to be played. And the same with like engagement and Instagram, especially you look at, Facebook posts, right? The algorithm they have, if they show strong engagement out of the gate, they show it to more people and then those more people can share it. And it's a weird place we live in where soon enough, like the bot army is going to be a real force to be reckoned with.
It's a little scary. I hadn't really thought about that. I guess I'm a chump. I built an actual audience of humans, man. Those people are so slow. Robots would have been way faster and probably cheaper, man. And they pay attention, certainly much better. You're right. I hadn't thought about the fact that now it's going to be really tough to distinguish. And have you seen this piece of software? I don't think it's public. In fact, I think it's purposely not public. Adobe had made this piece of software that can listen, and I'm putting that in air quotes, of course. It's an AI piece of audio software. It can listen to, say, 20 hours of the Aubrey Marcus podcast, and then I can tell it to say things in your voice, and it will perfectly be able to mimic. It's not just cutting out the words that you said in your podcast and making it a sentence. It is analyzing the tone of your voice, the cadence of your speech, the way that you talk, the vocabulary that you're using in certain respects. And then I can type a phrase like, I watch cable TV all day, and it'll sound just like you. Maybe the intonation's a little strange, but it's beta software. And it sounds like...
Eventually it won't be strange.
Yeah,
eventually it'll look exactly right. And that's when we're going to get into this really fucking funky world where you won't really be able to trust things.
You won't be able to trust anything.
So there'll be clips online of people saying things because the AI ability to facial recognize and then mask with CGI mouth movements with voice movements. You'll have somebody saying some shit online and be like, no, I didn't say that.
Yeah,
because like I have a video, and they're like, I know you have a video,
and that's fake too.
Me.
It'll have the amount of credibility as it would if I wrote a blog post and said Aubrey Marcus said he watches 18 hours of Netflix every day and only eats Alpha Brain instead of food. If I read that, I would say that's a bunch of bullshit. But then you're going to hear it in your voice and see your face saying it. That's going to be ridiculous. I mean, you think the news and the media are not trustworthy now. Imagine what it's like when you literally can't believe your own eyes unless you were in the room.
And imagine the propaganda machine as that gets kind of that. It just seems really scary.
It's terrifying. But I think it goes back to your earlier point, in fact, that you'd made on the Art of Charm podcast earlier about trust, because you'll know that the Aubrey Marcus podcast, the Art of Charm podcast, is not going to willingly deceive you for some quick financial or otherwise gain. So trust will become more important, and you'll have a few trusted sources that you can actually believe in versus now where I know people complain like the media, it's all fake, but I think most of us who are reasonable know there's actually plenty of reasonable, trustworthy sources of information. You just have to have a good set of critical thinking skills like what we're teaching on our show and what we teach on AOC. However, in the future, you're going to have the level of trust probably go higher with certain silos, like with certain figures. People are going to really be listening to Rogan. They're really going to be listening to you. They're really going to be listening to me, I hope, because they know that we're one of the only outlets that's not going to go, well, I could pretend I interviewed the president and make him say this thing and then sell a ton of Blue Apron subscriptions and buy a boat.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good point. You know, there'll always be the sources that you can control.
Right.
And of course somebody could hack that, but
sure.
you know, and I think that's where the value of live is going to come. And when you're just really standing there and turning on that camera and being like, all right, here's me, you know, this is what's going on.
Right.
And then if people trust you, then I think that's ultimately going to be the way to break through. But it's going to be a really interesting world that we're transitioning into where, but like all things, we just have to accommodate and adapt and evolve, and systems will come in place, you know, and it's a cops and robbers thing too with the social platforms. You know, as AI gets smarter, the AI detecting other AI will get smarter.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like the hackers and the security platforms, you know, it's this Red Queen system where one gets better, the other gets better, one gets better, the other gets better. And whoever manages that, and if they come out with a social platform that's better than the AI and you can really trust it, well, then people will divert their attention over to that one. So it's just going to be an interesting game.
I'll tell you though, there'll be a time when we're thinking, you know, those things you click that says I am not a bot, and it's like, oh, okay. And it somehow uses your mouse movements maybe, or you got to type in like, it says Rose Canary, and you type that caption in. We're going to laugh at those in a few years because of how easy that's going to be for AI to dupe. But right now, think of how primitive that check is, right? It's like if someone knocked on your door and you were like, who is it? And they were like, damn it, you got me again. And they just left, right? You know, that's the equivalent of that. Oh, man, I don't know what to say now. You got me here.
Right. Yeah. But eventually it'll be, you know, retina scanning.
Yeah. You'll have no clue how to not fake it. Yeah. Or they'll be such HD
They won't even be asking you. You know, they'll just know.
Right.
They'll just know based upon a set of behavior and your key
that's
strikes.
How Jordan Harbinger breathes when he's looking at the computer screen.
That's how hard he presses on the R key when he's typing these things.
It's not that far away, man. It's got, because they're gonna have to go somewhere with that, with the camera and the facial recognition, plus maybe your voice, plus maybe your fingerprint, because it's only a matter of time until security is defeatable to the point where, and then at what point are we still relevant? I don't know, but I sure as shit still want to be able to check Gmail.
Yeah. Speaking of still relevant, do you ever, you know, you have a podcast talks about a lot of business matters, and you know, a lot of economists and different thinkers are basically predicting that up to a third of the country is going to have, there's going to be no jobs available here pretty soon. Everything's going to be automated. Trucks are going to be automated, all of these different things. And that's going to be another massive disruptive force. You know, do you ever talk to people who kind of address that or think about that yourself? Like, what is this future that we're going into?
I do think about that a lot because I used to be an attorney. I guess I technically still am, but I don't practice. And one of the go-to catchphrases is always like, it's not just going to be manufacturing jobs. It's going to be lawyers and doctors that are obsolete. And they say that because, of course, legal research is something that could easily be done by AI much faster. Legal thinking and constructs can be done for the most part. And half of what most lawyers do anyway is document filing, especially if it's like trusts, estates, things like that. A lot of that stuff at the bottom level is very basic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think about that all the time. And man, was it Kevin Kelly or maybe Peter Diamandis or somebody like that was saying there's an intersection at which you are creating enough of what you're doing is artistic and enough of what you are doing is specialized to your own experience and the way that you express it, that you become still for the time being irreplaceable. CEO is another one of those that's going to become a different job, but not irrelevant, because what you do all day at Onnit, in my imagination, is make a bunch of small decisions all the time and go, this is a job for this person. Actually, let's not do this. I don't like the look of that. Let's meet about it later. These are decisions that computers cannot yet make. Some of your job will be automated, but a lot of it has to do with your judgment, which computers can't really do yet.
Yeah.
And what I do is essentially a performance. When you look at like Joe Rogan's podcast, that's essentially a performance, right? It's not even essentially. It is a performance. That stuff, they still haven't figured out how or if they will ever automate. It's only a matter of time, of course, before there's a Rogan bot that's always funnier or always not, not tired.
I heard someone describe that as like, imagine you had 1 year to come up with the proper response to every question and every comment.
Right.
That's how fast these bots and these AI will be able to think in real time. So they'll be able to comb through what would take you a year to come up and practice and measure the right response or the right intonation. They'll be able to do that every single time they say anything. And at that point, potentially they could be funnier than we are.
Absolutely. Imagine they look at all the comedy and they're able to analyze this somehow.
Yeah.
They're able to analyze everything that's gone on in that conversation, and there's callback humor that's immediate based on like, I'm going to read the whole transcript of this, look at all the current news that's going on in the news cycle right now, read all of those, watch all those videos in 1/10 of 1 second, and come up with the perfect thing to say that's relevant and funny.
And then with art too, analyzing the different art patterns.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a bit romantic, and I want to hold out for, the value of humanity above all else. But it's, and I still believe that there is something about a human connection. I don't think you'll ever be able to put your heart up against a robot and feel what you feel, when you put your heart up against another human being. But
maybe, right?
Yeah.
But what if you can't tell the difference, right? Like, what if you're looking at a piece of art and you think that's amazing, and then you find out it was painted by a Lego printer?
Well, that's possible. I'm talking about like the actual physical connection.
Oh, I'm sure. But you do know, right? You've seen those weird Japanese robots.
I've seen Westworld.
Westworld, and it's like, is that only a matter of time? And sure, it's a robot, so you maybe don't care. And then you're like, I like my human companion. But what if there was a robot that maybe never pissed you off and always looked great and didn't need to hit the gym and didn't need coffee in the morning before they had that glow that you appreciate so much?
It's an interesting thought experiment. I wonder if they'll be able to pass that, mark, where you can really feel all the same things. I mean, I explore a lot of psychedelic states, and there's things that happen amongst conscious human beings. I guess it's a question of whether robots are going to become conscious, because there's a thing that happens amongst conscious human beings, especially in that space, that transcends ordinary sensory perception, and it happens also when you're having sex or in certain conversations or communications or even playing sports, or, there's certain kind of flow states that happens. And I really wonder if that would be possible with a non-human entity, unless that entity was conscious. And that's the beauty of that Westworld show, is they're exploring AI on the cusp of consciousness, becoming conscious. And at the point that it's conscious, it's a full life form, right? Like, so at that point, I don't think there's any difference.
There's no difference, right?
But anything short of consciousness, I think, will be detectable. And is true consciousness able to be created?
And what does that actually mean?
What does it actually mean?
I'm totally with you on that. I'm looking at new robotics and machines and things like that. You end up on the edge of simulation theory, where you're like, oh, well, we'll never be able to make a robot conscious. And then it's like, well, the human brain is still so far advanced of what our computing systems can do now. Look at the amount of voltage and the little nano circuitry, not even, that's in the human brain at the cellular level. And then you think, well, wait a minute. Is it only a matter of time till we can 3D print at a molecular level? Probably. So then could we print something biological? Probably. So we could print a brain that is the exact structure of the brain that you have in your head right now. And would that be any different since it's a biological 3D printed set of mass?
Then the question becomes, is the brain the seat of your consciousness?
Right. Yeah, good point. I didn't think about that.
And then because I think that, yeah, probably we could replicate a brain, but then is that consciousness something, is the consciousness the thing that animates the robot, or is the thing that emanates from the robot? Like, because we are the robot, does the consciousness come from us, or the consciousness use us as the vehicle to go through? I tend to think the latter. I think consciousness exists and transcends the actual form. So we would be basically creating, as like mini gods ourselves, creating, new conscious beings with like new souls, basically. And soul's a weird word to use for that, but whatever, new consciousness that, in my opinion, once that's created, if it passes the bar of consciousness, it transcends the life of that. It transcends the life of that robot. So, I mean, fuck, that gets trippy. I haven't even followed it this far,
this is
right?
your philosophical degree in studies coming into play here.
But then, so presuming then that if we created something that had genuine consciousness, or allowed consciousness, at least a vehicle for consciousness to come through, it gets really interesting, because then if that robot got terminated, then would the consciousness then be able to reincarnate into another actual life form? Or where are we going? Like, what are the boundaries here? And I tend to still stay somewhat on the skeptic side of us actually creating what would pass the bar of consciousness. But of course, you got to be open to all possibilities and see. And I don't think any of these things that I have, they're just speculation. Like, you can't prove any of this stuff surrounding consciousness very well at all. So, just be one of those things where we'll look with curiosity and a little bit of fear and a little bit of a smile and see what's going to happen.
I'm excited for it because, well, first of all, most of the stuff that we teach at the Art of Charm has to do with nonverbal communication, body language, persuasion, and influence. I know that the name for a lot of people conjures up like, oh, it's about getting laid or picking up chicks. That era is so far gone for us. It's years and years and years ago. And even then, it was just because we were in our 20s trying to get other guys in their 20s to be interested in the stuff that we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. And what we find is that when you're looking at nonverbal communication, persuasion, and influence, we are really limited by the amount of bandwidth that our conscious brain has. And even to a certain extent, our subconscious brain has to understand or understand the communications from other people and their bodies as well. But when you're looking at artificial intelligence, you're looking at massive amounts of bandwidth that are unfathomable right now to us as humans who have this little narrow bandwidth where we can see, smell, hear just a little bit. And we're also only able to do a few things consciously. Like if I think consciously about sitting up straight and having great posture in this chair after the few hours that we've been here, I start to lose presence in the conversation. But an artificial being could do that times 1,000, times a million. In different areas, facing different things and doing different calculations. And it reminds me of that movie, I think it was called Her, right? With ScarJo and Joaquin Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And he's like, but we had something special. And she's like, I'm having millions of conversations at the exact same time. You're just one of them. Yeah. And he's just like crushed, right? Because he's like, oh crap. Because he's devoting all of his bandwidth to her.
Right.
And she's like, dude, I literally have a million dudes just like you.
Yeah.
And you're in slow motion for me. I can do this so fast. You're just like it's like talking with a sloth.
I can't think of the name of that other movie too, but there's a movie where there was basically like a prisoner, like a robot prisoner, and then she just charms her way out of captivity.
Oh, right. Ex Deus Machina or something like that.
Yeah. Ex Machina.
Ex Machina, right. I was thinking, I don't know. There's another phrase, right?
Yeah. But yeah, where she was just so charming and seductive and knew how to read the sublingual patterns of the individual and the pupil dilation and all of these calculations that the human mind is really difficult to make. And you have to have a strong body of knowledge in order to really even fathom that and seduce and murder her way out into the wild.
She's looking at humans like, really, man? All I have to do is do
that easy?
Right. And because he's trying to get her to pass the Turing test the whole time so that you can't tell if it's human. And she's looking at him like, this is just child's play for me to push his emotional switches.
Yeah.
And that type of human simulation is really only a matter of time, regardless of what they look like or if they're behind those glass walls like they are in that movie. That's one of the conundrums of AI, right? Is it going to become smarter than us and then learn how to make itself smarter until we are to it like a cat is to us, right? Or an ant, right? You wouldn't think twice about the morality of moving an anthill to expand the On It office here, right? So is that AI going to think similarly about our city that's standing in the way of it manufacturing more of itself? Maybe not.
That's the Terminator question.
That's the Terminator question, right?
Yeah. Do you, I think so many times we think of humans as having complete sovereignty of our choice. But then, as someone who understands even charm itself, I mean, a lot of times you're working on, kind of unconscious and subconscious patterns.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
On that. Yeah.
And that really highlights how much is out of our scope of control, how much is just happening on that, underneath layer, beneath all that, and then really recognizing like all of these other factors. And so when you look at someone like Trump or another politician, do you notice things that maybe some other people wouldn't do, just being from your experience and knowledge about ways to charm and kind of slightly hypnotize other people?
Yeah. I mean, by way of background, just in case people aren't familiar with who I am and what I do, not only do we teach people body language and nonverbal communication and influence, but very recently we had a bunch of Green Berets come through the course. We had SEAL Team 6 come through our live training before the Bin Laden mission. So we have kind of like consumer facing, and then we have intelligence agency and military facing training. And what we're looking at are these patterns of human belief, deception, influence, and persuasion. And when looking at politicians is actually relatively easy, because a lot of the time they're speaking to the lowest common denominator. Doesn't matter what side of the fence they're on. They're speaking to as many people as they can. And whenever you're trying to speak to a large group of people, you always have to lower the caliber of your communication. Mm-hmm. So some people think, oh, it's so genius. Look at the way he's speaking with this and this and this. Usually you're overthinking it if you go that route. If you're speaking to 1,000 people and you want the largest percentage of them to be influenced, you really do have to speak to the baseline of that entire group.
Right.
And if you can't choose the 1,000 people, you can imagine what that baseline looks like. So yes, I think if you do look at the way humans communicate and you have a knowledge of, we like to refer to it as the matrix because it sounds awesome and we're nerds. If you have a knowledge of the matrix, right, you're looking at the way that people are persuaded, and it's really, really obvious, and it's really, really simple. And I'm sure you've heard things like, oh, if you want someone to agree to your idea, make them think it's their idea. That's kind of persuasion 101 advice. And everyone right now listening or watching this is like, that wouldn't work on me. I would notice that happening. And the truth is, it happens to you every day, and you have no idea that it's happening.
Yeah.
You might find out later, oh, I want some coffee. Well, yeah, you do. But why? Oh, well, that sovereignty that Aubrey was talking about, that's all me. This is an idea that I have in my head. But when we study human behavior and when we put people in laboratory settings or even pseudo laboratory settings like we work with at AOC, where it's, this is not a real academic science lab. Mm-hmm. You can find that there's experiments that both academics and that we do that show, look, there's all kinds of ideas that are planted in your head through marketing, suggestion, maybe hypnosis stuff, which I don't put a ton of stock into. But if you want coffee this morning, it's because of cultural influence. It's because of something you heard yesterday. It's because of a smell you just experienced that was deliberately put into the air near the business that sells coffee. It's because somebody walked by with a cup that said Starbucks on it. And even if you hate Starbucks, it still had the trigger that Starbucks has spent hundreds of millions of dollars programming into your head. And we think that those ideas are our own, just as your Xbox thinks it invented the game that you're playing on it right now. It doesn't think anything. It just has it on there, right? Your computer in the first AI and the smartest computers that we ever will build will at some level probably, and I put think in quotes, think that those ideas are original, just as us humans do the same thing. And we're always wrong about that.
Yeah. It seems like when you're dealing with something like that, like even with Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, like I was in an employment situation where that book saved my life, literally.
Really?
Like it was, without that book, I wouldn't have understood the environment that I worked in, and I would have gotten emotionally and financially slaughtered, right? So for me, I was reading that book, in a kind of defensive posture, like, what the hell's going on? How come I keep...
Were you employed in a prison? What were you doing?
It was not a good situation. But, so there was like this kind of defensive element of that. And I think with something like that, you need to know enough of those basics to know when it's being done on you, like at the very bare minimum. And then there's the offensive side of it, which is utilizing this to your advantage. And then, knowing the morality behind those choices. I thought that was one of the beautiful things about Robert Greene's book, is that he divorced it from morality.
Right.
He allowed the reader to take up his own moral suggestion. So if he was illustrating a good example, like observance of the law is what he calls it in 48 Laws of Power, and it involves slaughtering 20,000 people, he didn't say, shame on him. He just said, this is what he did. This is how he used his power. This was effective. And I thought that was a cool way to do it, just allowing the user to do that. And I think with any kind of charm or seduction, it's that double-edged sword. You want to be able to inoculate yourself against it, and then you have to then decide your own morality about when to use it. And there's a quote from Chogyam Trungpa who says, a warrior's decency is the absence of strategy. There's a certain point where, yeah, all right, maybe you shouldn't use this on your girlfriend, maybe you shouldn't use this on your business partner, but maybe in a certain case, you should use this on your bank loan officer. You know what I mean? Like you should do all of the tricks to get yourself the advantage if you're going to do something positive with that. So it's an interesting field. Do you go into that? How do you handle the morality of the issue?
It's tough. And I was just thinking about this recently. Some of it, well, it's a super complex issue, right? But of course, some of it comes down to the question of how much agency do you want the other party to retain? And what I mean by that is, if you are holding a knife you're holding a knife, it doesn't matter if you're holding it to my throat or not, and you're like, look, this is going in your gut, give me all your money. I'm probably going to, of course, give up my wallet and things like that. But if I think that that's not going to get me out of that situation, there might be more that I have to do. And on the show, I've talked about this a million times, but I've been kidnapped twice, and once was by Serbian state security officers when I was there working with the Department of Defense as a teacher. Complex sort of scenario, but essentially they were asking me I was taken to a safe house, and they were basically not even sure what they were going to do with me. And at that point, I didn't want them to retain any agency. I didn't want them to be free thinkers. I didn't want them to have space to make decisions. I wasn't worried about my future relationships with them, right? This was pure self-defense. So in that type of scenario, any sort of persuasion, any sort of physical force, and any sort of lying or deception is fully on the table.
Yep.
However, if you're with your wife or your girlfriend and you're in a room and you're like, man, I really want sushi tonight, and she seems to be hell-bent on pizza, you may want to...
Go full out that point. Yeah. That point, if it's that trivial, then also go for it.
It depends how much you hate pizza, right? Really depends on how much you hate pizza, how bad you want sushi. But you may choose, like, look, long-term relationship, I don't want to manipulate this person into thinking or feeling or bending to my will. And you find that in unhealthy people, sociopaths and things like that, they don't have that. They don't want anybody around them to have any agency
sushi
whatsoever.
Every fucking day.
Sushi every fucking night, every lunch and dinner. And they do that because they don't care about other people's autonomy at all, which is unhealthy for them long term. But they don't care about that either. They don't care about what's good for other people. They only care about what's good for themselves. And that eventually caves in because it's only short-term thinking. Mm-hmm. So really, I think about this a lot. One of the core concerns is how much agency you want other people to retain. Because agency in relationships, it's like this wooden wall you've got here in studio. If every time I damage that agency, I hammer a nail into that wall, I can pull out all the nails later on by trying to rebuild, look, I'm going to value your opinions more. I'm not going to use these skills on you anymore. I want you to be a free thinker. I want you to bring more of yourself into the relationship that we have. There's still holes in the wall. You can't just pull the nail out and it's going to close up. That's how it's going to look forever. Or the crinkling a paper analogy, right? You can smooth it out as much as you want, but you can still see the cracks where you folded it. And that's why these skills have to be applied in ways that are ethical. And that's why the core message of AOC and the Art of Trauma podcast is always leave everything and everyone better than you found it. It sounds like this dumb Pollyanna motto, right? But you have to follow that with the application of the skills that we teach, or you're going to harm everyone around you, and you're going to damage yourself by misapplying this inside your relationships at work and at home.
Yeah, I remember reading Neil Strauss's The Game.
Sure.
And that was like one of the first books in the pickup artist community to really make a huge splash. And, at the time I was really, I was frustrated because I felt like I was a really good guy and I wasn't able to get the girls that I wanted to get still. I mean, I was starting to transition.
How old were you at this time?
Right when the book came out. So
2005 probably.
Yeah. So that was like 24, somewhere around there. Fresh out of college or just finishing up college, right around in that period, transitioning out. And I think that's probably kind of always a tough point for anybody because they're losing their college clout and then transitioning into like bottom of the barrel again. It's that
new surroundings, new identity that you have to adopt to survive. And you're certainly not the top of the totem pole at your new organization.
Hell no. You're don't have any money. You don't have
straight flipping copies.
And there's no Tinder at that point either. There's no Bumble. No. It was just straight up normal. So it was really interesting to me. But then there's also the dark side of it too, like the idea of negging somebody, which is part of that book. Something that you say that insults them and ruffles their ego and then creates this desire to remedy that and create some kind of, you could describe it a lot better than me. But it was this weird balance of like, you have to put your own morality in that situation as well and be like, am I comfortable doing that? Am I comfortable walking up to this person and insulting them for my advantage? And then what is my ultimate end game? Is it just to use some resource that this person has, sexual or financial or whatever, and then discard them? Or is this for their long-term benefit? It's a really interesting thing when you actually start to delve into that.
Yeah.
And it's like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great
responsibility. Exactly. Yeah. And you nailed it. That's out of the fires of that book, because we were around before that book and we were doing a lot of networking stuff, and guys just did not care about networking and persuasion. They wanted to learn how to meet and attract women. So we started to focus the show in that area, which is, it worked great until it stopped working. It was kind of like, no, we're the good drug dealers, right? Everyone's like, ugh, you're one of those guys. So we rebranded slowly. It's like steering a ship that is an oil tanker. You can't just turn it around and go, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
You really have to turn it slowly. But out of the fires of that type of thing was the AOC forged in terms of leave everything and everyone better than you found it, because crap like that negging stuff goes towards the earlier point of agency. How much agency do I want this person to retain? If I'm going to throw a neg on some gal, that what I'm doing that for is to get her to question herself, maybe lower her sense of status or self-worth in order to stop analyzing my status, put myself on a pedestal above her, make myself look more attractive based on my position relative to hers. Does that really sound like the foundations of a good relationship? No, it is designed for short-term, in fact, predatory reaction that is indeed for one person's benefit only.
Yep.
And you can try to say, well, the ends justify the means, and I'll ditch all that later on. Okay, someone's going to email you and I like, no, that's how I met my wife. Good for you, but that was still crappy. You could have met your wife by rear-ending her on the highway. And would that have been the best way to do it? No, probably not.
How many romantic comedies have that plot, though? Like you meet someone as part of a game or part of a ruse, or you're pretending to be someone that you're not.
Right.
And then they fall in love for real. And then they find out like you were lying this whole time.
It's the central problem.
And then cue like pizza box montage where they have to suffer. And if the audience sees that they suffered enough and they didn't love anybody else and their hair grew out and their life was ruined, they'll forgive that person enough to get the girl back.
Right. Like Wedding Crashers subplot.
Yeah, it's like so many of them have that. And I think maybe that speaks to that general archetype of how much we all tend to just lie at the start.
We do.
Start of a relationship. I mean, I've seen 3 Bumble profiles with my fucking pictures on them.
Are you serious?
Yeah. One of them was pretty funny. Like the catfishing is obviously a whole other level. I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, what's the plan after they click yes?
But this one was pretty clever. It goes, I'm not really into bees, but maybe you, honey. And I was like, oh, that was cool.
Oh, got it. Okay. I'm clearly not. I'm way out of my field here, out of my depth here.
But
my Bumble game.
It's really interesting. Like even if you're not using somebody else's pictures, like everybody's always, even on Instagram, you're presenting the best pictures, the best angles, the best and fucking makeup. You
Yeah.
know, like we're always
Sure.
presenting the best version of the truth in any situation.
But that's fine, right? There's a huge difference between
Yeah.
presenting yourself in the best light possible and deceiving someone else outright to believe something, either through omission, and you know who you are, the people who are like, I'm going to allude to the fact that I'm wealthy or something like that is still just as deceptive.
Right.
But if there is a line, and the question becomes what's acceptable to you. And a lot of folks don't think about it this way, but I highly recommend you do. Deceive others only insofar as you are comfortable being deceived by them in the long run. So if I'm putting your pictures up on Bumble and I'm thinking this is going to result in me some sort of positive outcome for me, I don't know. I would have to do a lot of things to change myself in order to be able to pull this off if we meet at Starbucks, right?
Right.
Which she's probably going to be expecting something slightly different than what you see here. Okay. But if I'm comfortable doing that with them, then I have to be equally comfortable for her to go, hey, sorry I didn't tell you that I'm actually 150 pounds overweight and I'm missing my right ear.
Yeah.
You have to be totally comfortable with that. That's not really a good foundation for a relationship. So whenever we're tempted to deceive other people in business or in our personal life, just apply it like, in fact, we can coin this term now, the seesaw rule, right? I'm comfortable doing this only insofar as you balance it out on the other side. And usually the answer is, I just kind of want the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ultimately it comes down to what I call the platinum rule, which is treat everybody as if they are you living a different life.
Oh, that's nice. I like
you
that.
know, instead of, it's just, we're really all the same. We're really all the same, you know, different perspective of the same being, but we're all the same. You can't do something to somebody else you're not doing to yourself, because
it sounds like an ayahuasca realization.
It was.
It was?
Yeah. And very plant medicine in general, organized, just this understanding of, oh, that's just me with a different set of circumstances, different set of genetics, a different environment they grew up in, but it's me. And so the idea, I think all predatory behavior and all kind of quotes, bad or evil behavior, it rests on the primary delusion and primary fallacy that the people that you're preying on aren't you.
So it's inherently self-destructive
It's
no matter
inherently
what.
self-destructive.
There you go.
No doubt.
I like that a lot, actually. That's brilliant. I love the idea that, but that's got to be so hard to execute in the moment. How do you manage that? I mean, I know you're interviewing me here, but how do you execute that in the moment? Like, all right, but I really want to, you know, do something with this person or to this person or, you know, as a result of this meeting, but I've got to treat them like they're me.
You got to
That's
practice
tough.
it. Yeah, you do. And you have to practice it. And for me, and this is, you know, this is a whole topic for another thing, but for me, open relationship has really tested that the most, because I'm in an open relationship with my fiance. And then, so for me, I get to practice that with her lovers. You know, I get to, what normally is the instinct, like, oh, you're going to fuck my girl. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to stab you.
I have a visceral reaction.
I'm going to stab you. I'm going to stab you in all the throats.
Right.
You know, with
Every
all the knives
throat.
in all the throats. And that's the initial reaction. And then you get to practice, no. That's me living a different life, who's enjoying himself. And that's my girl, who's me living a different life, enjoying herself. Two people enjoying themselves. And I'm the one getting mad. What's the problem here? The problem here is me getting angry. The problem here is me not looking at it like that. The problem is me looking at this as some kind of insult or them taking, when it's really just two people sharing a positive experience. So something like that allows you to, it throws you in the fire and allows you to practice that over and over and over again.
Man, I'm like simulating some of the, you have to, man, this must, speaking of steering a ship, you really have to slowly move in that direction. I think.
It's been 3 years, and the first 2.5 were hell, and there's still fucking dark moments. Like there's still dark moments, still things still defense mechanisms that I'll catch myself doing.
Mm-hmm. Passive aggressive BS and stuff like that.
Or trying to pretend that it's something else, trying to think like, oh no, I'm cool with the open side, but you're really being a bitch about this.
Yeah.
And just
How
hammering
dare
her.
you forget to go to Whole Foods.
Hammering her about some other thing.
Sure.
And then realizing, you know what? It really wasn't that. It was that I'm hurt about the open relationship deal, and I'm not allowing myself to feel that. I'm just projecting it onto some other thing.
Right, sure.
So there's still, it's just constant work, but it's a good, like anything, you know, how do you practice makes the master. How do you practice seeing someone as you living a different life? You practice it.
So okay, I don't know if you accidentally answered that and I just didn't get the answer, but how do you practice that in the moment, because you're going to feel that emotional trigger. Maybe even not in the open relationship thing, but let's say you're walking down the street, 6th Street, and someone's like, hey man, do you have any change? And you're thinking like, this is the 50th person who's asking me for this stuff. Look, I feel bad that you're homeless, but you're holding a 40. Like, I don't have that much sympathy for you. But then you kind of have to. But there's a fine line, because you would want to donate if you were treating it like yourself, but
maybe not. Maybe
not the best thing.
Maybe you wouldn't want to enable, though.
Right, exactly. Sure.
Like enabling is a real thing. It's not always pandering to someone's basest instincts. If a crackhead says, can I have some more crack? Maybe you don't give them that. If someone who's addicted to compliments or addicted to sex or addicted to, the small amount of money that they're getting so that they don't have to do the things to get themselves out of the hole, then you're just enabling them. So it really isn't an act of love or compassion. It's really an act of indulgence on your side.
So crap example on my part.
No, but I think that's the only way out.
So you do make this calculation in many ways, almost as a rationalization of what you were going to do anyway, though, on the other
it
side
depends.
of it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's certain cases where compassion and generosity is 100% warranted, but you also have to know that you count too. Like, you have to value yourself and your own resources and your own availability. You can't give exponentially and not receive in return, because you'll delete your own. So you have to value yourself, make sure that you value yourself as important, long term. And then, be mindful of enabling versus these other forces. It's
a tough calculation, man.
It's a tough calculation.
There's a lot going on upstairs every time you walk down 6th Street here.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but that's ultimately the ideal, the platonic ideal that you thrive for, is to really treat everybody like they're you.
I found in a lot of the interviews that we do with really successful folks, like we had Shaq on recently, and he was talking about very similar ideas, that he's really not that different. And this is Shaq, bear in mind, very different from other humans in many ways. And he also sees himself as not that different from other people. And I asked, who was it recently? Bill Nye the Science Guy, I believe, also had very sort of common man beliefs about, look, everybody's essentially very similar. We have to start thinking of ourselves that way. Once we start seeing ourselves on these different strata, this is where problems arise. And I've noticed that people who are exceptionally successful and highly intelligent, they all do start to converge, maybe not all, but many start to converge in the same direction. And I think it's because they're more thoughtful, possibly also because they have the luxury of being more thoughtful, because they're not focused on survival. Were you always, oh crap, you're interviewing me. But anyway, were you always thinking about things like this even when you were younger? Or was this like, I take a philosophy class in college and then suddenly you just made a right turn?
I think it was imbued. I had some of those values imbued, but without the philosophical underpinnings. Like, my mom was always the type of person, she says, look, we won't be able to help everybody or everything, but if it crosses our paths, we're going to do our best. So that could be an animal that showed up with a broken wing, or, I remember any type of situation. I remember one time there was a hawk that showed up and it had a mangled wing. And my mom had me get an oven mitt and walk out there, and I had a beef on the oven mitt, and I was terrified, and I had ski goggles on in case it clawed at my eyes or something. We'd always try to help any animal that we could, or any person that we could that would come through. And so the morality was there kind of early
on,
but then the philosophical underpinnings of, that hawk is me expressed in a different life form, in a different machine. That person is me expressed in that came from the psychedelic journeys, I think, and the expansion upon of my philosophy.
I should probably stop asking you questions. I already had my turn.
Yeah, brother. Well, I gotta wrap this thing up. Anyways,
okay,
man.
then.
Dude, it was a real pleasure. It's been a long time in the works, right? We've been trying to do this forever.
This only took 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do round 2 in a slightly smaller.
Like, we're in like a bi-decade pattern.
Yeah. That should be good. The next time we do this, we can have it on the Onnit plane or the Onnit private Onnit island.
There it is.
Yeah.
Manifestation. People, listen to the Art of Charm podcast. Where can they follow you to?
Sure. So I don't use all the bajillion different sources. So I don't use all the social media things because I feel like I'm overwhelmed even explaining that I don't use all the social media things. So I'm on Twitter, great place to engage. People can email me, jordan@theartofcharm.com. But look,
a bold move, putting your email out there.
Yeah.
Look at you. He's a man of the people, everyone.
Man of the people. But I you know what? You're already listening to a podcast. I would love it if people would check out the Art of Charm podcast. And look, you don't have to like me, but somebody out there likes Shaq, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Neil deGrasse Tyson, General McChrystal. I mean, we got great people on that show, and I let them do a lot more talking than I let you have, than I let you do today on your own show.
I love it, man. I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Much love, everybody. Peace.